Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ladies of SOSA podcast. My name is Sara.
And my name is Christine.
Today, we are extending the conversation we had with our lovely panel.
We have Tariq in the studio.
Tariq,
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
How are y'all doing? Tariq Arnabe. Good to be back.
How do you feel? You went viral last week.
I did.
You did on Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah. My bank account didn't rise.
That's usually how it works.
Yeah. Oh, so Tariq went viral last week because he was talking about how henna is Sudanese culture.
I get a lot of arguments with people who be saying henna is an Arab culture. Henna is not Arab culture. Henna is from Sudan. The henna plant only grows in the Nile. Through the slave trade, the henna culture went to the Gulf, and they made it bigger when they were doing their conquest. So henna is Sudanese, jalabiya is Sudanese, fulmadamas is Sudanese. So all these things that people think it is Arab culture, is not. It's our culture.
Are we gonna clip that?
And not Arab culture. So that sparked a lot of discussion. And yes, so
it was a lot of back and forth. I think he mentioned fulmadamas and what else? You
jalabiya.
said and jalabiya too. So there was a lot of pushback on that. But I think there's always a lot of back and forth when it comes to figuring out what is the identity of Sudan. I think sometimes people try to put Sudan in a box and say it's this or it's that. But Sudan is a country that has a lot of different groups of people, a lot of different identities. So I think that's also why we have a lot of conflict sometimes, because people try to just put it in a box and say it's just one thing. But there's so many different kind of groups of people that coexist together. So it was just interesting to see the discourse and how people were in support and were happy that this was being highlighted, but also the controversy that came with that clip, which I kind of expected. So
I actually didn't expect that. But I love it. I love it. Yeah.
I knew it was gonna go viral when I said
yeah.
it. I think somebody said, "Oh, we're clipping that."
That was me. I felt the energy because you said it with such conviction. Is what I told Sarah. I was like, "Yeah, people are gonna have something to say about that."
Yeah.
But yeah, we want to bring you guys in when we talk about like the different contributions, obviously, that Sudan has.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and officially read your intro that you guys both deserved. So Dr. Bayan is a PhD candidate whose research focuses on the Arab slave trade and its impact on East African societies. She explores intersections between race, memory, and history, and is passionate about recentering African voices in academic narratives. She's also a writer, a researcher, an archivist, and her academic and advocacy work focuses on and addresses Sudan's historical and contemporary dilemmas as they relate to issues of racialization, militarization, and global and local empire-making schemes. Bayan's dissertation, The 40 Days Road and the World Around It, Race, Slavery, and Society in Ottoman Egyptian Sudan, 1840 to 1924, centers Sudan in trans-Saharan and Ottoman histories of slavery and circuits of capital.
On Anwar, he is currently pursuing a degree in archaeology at the University of Michigan. He has participated in multiple excavation trips in Sudan where he has unearthed artifacts tied to the region's ancient past. Anwar brings a unique lens to this conversation through the physical evidence of our forgotten history. So welcome, guys. We want to reintroduce you guys again to our panel on this episode and go ahead and dive into the conversation. And we are going to be touching on our previous episode where we kind of touched on the East African slave trade. Yes. That one was super interesting and we got a lot of feedback from it. So we decided to get a few guests that can help us dive a little bit deeper into this topic.
Yes. So we're going to be discussing the East African slave trade, also combining that episode and when we talked about Sudanese civilization and how Sudan or Africa has contributed to modern day civilization. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our panel.
Awesome. So we're going to start with Bayan. Since you're already on screen, please introduce yourself.
Thank you guys so much for having me and for just hosting a platform for us to have this conversation. So my name is Bayan and I'm in my final year of my PhD at Yale. I'm a PhD candidate of history, and I look at the history of slavery in Sudan in the 19th century, broadly speaking, during the Ottoman period. And I'm really interested basically in how the circuits of trade that made up the trade of enslaved people in Sudan and beyond it sort of connected it to the global trade of Black people across the Sahara, into the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. So I'm really trying to integrate Sudan into this period of world history. Yeah, I'm really, just interested in mobilizing some of the lessons I've learned about Sudanese history to, bring them into the present. And so I'm a historian of modern Sudan. I focus on the 19th century specifically. And this last bit was about sort of the ancient contributions and also generally the contributions of Sudanese people to world history. And it's funny because as we were talking about it, I was kind of thinking about how I kind of studied like the negative inverse of that, which is like I look at how sort of slavery as an institution functioned in the 19th century. And I'm really interested also in sort of like decentering European systems of rule and systems of violence and looking at how non-European imperial governments, as well as like local elites, and like the local bourgeoisie also sort of contributed to the exploitation of Sudan. So in that regard, like my contribution is kind of, or the contributions I look at of Sudan to the world is kind of, and the making of the world is this like force of, extractive nation states. But yeah, that's kind of what I look at. I think, when I was in college, I was a history major as well. And I think one thing that I was interested by was just the fact that there was a lot of writings about the 20th century and British rule in Sudan. And also I remember being a kid when South Sudan split. And, just a sort of liberal sentiment in Sudan being that of like, oh, this is like a failure of the state and this is the result of British colonialism and this is the condition that we're in as African people. And like, I don't know, the contradictions of that being that like Sudanese people are really racist. Like even in my experience, like experiencing racism from other Arabs, I still think that the racism of Northern Sudanese is much worse. Yeah, like there just was a sense of like a lack of responsibility that I found really shocking, especially because like the legacy of slavery is so rampant in Sudan. Like it wasn't until I was in college and like started reading that I understood how pervasive slavery was and as an institution in Sudan that so many people continue to have enslaved peoples in their home. Maybe they were, legally free, but technically by social sort of positioning and what they inherited, they basically were enslaved people. And this is despite the fact that when I was a child, like it was the mark of slavery was all over Sudan, and that this was just a fact of like day-to-day life. And so, yeah, I think I was always just interested in like reclaiming that sense of responsibility and sort of seeing where Sudanese people fit and like where history has taken us. And yeah, that just led me to studying the 19th century because it's one of the most understudied periods because it is a period when, the Ottoman Empire ruled over Sudan via Ottoman Egypt. It was sort of like or a three-layered imperial like scheme in that like the Ottoman Egypt was a province of the larger empire and sort of functioning as like a colony within a colony and using Sudan to become that. And then when the British came, it even became much more of a sort of competitive imperial landscape. And yeah, that period is mainly understudied just because of the language barrier, the fact that a lot of the sources that are needed to understand this history are written in Ottoman Turkish. And so, yeah, since that period, which was at this point, like 7 years ago, no, like almost 10 years ago, I've just been doing this work of trying to uncover the many-directional or the multi-directional sort of history of violence in Sudan. And yeah, I've been doing research for the past few years in different archives in Europe and in Sudan and in Egypt. Doing this work. I was in Sudan during the war doing archival research there, but unfortunately I lost a lot of my documents that I was working with. But yeah, I've just been making by since then and trying to finish this PhD. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You just made a comment that a lot of North Sudanese are sometimes more racist than Arab people. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that my work has really shown me is that I think that the more proximate you are to a nation state or an empire that administers violence based on how close you are to sort of what people who are exploited look like. I don't know. I feel like the more invested that society becomes and sort of policing those borders of who and who not is able to be who is not able to receive certain kinds of violence. And that being said, in Sudan I feel like just the boundaries of racial identity and what that meant was so tangible, in that, you know, when you had conversations about who could get married, there was always a conversation about blood and lineage and status, and like what this would do to like a history of a family, like legacy. And I always, as a child, I was like, I moved in between the US and Sudan, and I was like, you know, I grew up also in Arizona in the US. So, you know, a border state with Mexico. And there's a very particular kind of racism that happens there. But I was like, although I thought that was a very aggressive form, I feel like this is so explicit, and just in terms of how society is ordered and how it should be ordered. Like there's a commitment to maintaining this that is so pervasive, that is intergenerational, and that is unquestioned. Like I don't know. I find it funny sometimes how people, even in the diaspora, who are like 2 or 3 generations removed from Sudan, or like really 1 generation removed from Sudan, you know, end up talking about their tribal identity and like sort of carrying the sentiments of what that means racially, even though it's like displaced from like the place where it actually holds meaning, Sudan. And yeah, so I just find it so absurd, but I think also just so telling of how a place like Sudan really functions.
Do you feel like it's taboo, like the issue of racism in Sudan, that it's often talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was like maybe less than a decade ago. I'm still a bit more taboo, but I think recently there's been sort of inroads in like having a broader conversation. I mean, I think with the revolution, like, you know, one of the slogans was "the whole country is Darfur," and I think this was a reckoning of the fact that like the violence that had existed on the peripheries of the country for so long had finally come to Khartoum, and that meant something. Like there had been a sort of differentiated rule between these 2 places, and I think, I don't know, I think it's taboo because there's a very sort of complicated understanding of how race and power operate together in Sudan and what that means. And I think that maybe sometimes race isn't enough to sort of contain all of the sort of ways that violence and power are administered in Sudan. So maybe it wasn't so much taboo, as it was just not encompassing enough of like the things that people wanted to express. But I do think that now that language has been integrated into like the public imaginary, and like there are more explicit conversations about it. But I do think that like this sense of responsibility in terms of how we contributed to how we got here, I think that's still something that's evolving, and that is only being tested, I think, as the war goes on.
Yeah. What do you feel like are the modern day implications of slavery? Because that's within your study. How do you feel like slavery has played a part into Sudan's like political structure and just the social dynamics in the country? I know Dr. Nizreen, who recommended you, shout out to Dr. Nizreen, we had her on the podcast. She talked about how there's still people in the Jazeera area of where she's from that still labor on people's lands that are technically free people, but they are descendants of slaves. And so you still see them kind of being still working in other people's houses or doing labor, and how that's still reminiscent of slavery and how that's kind of like an implication of slavery. What do you think are some other implications that you can give us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, important to note that in the 19th century, when slavery became like an institutionalized sort of structure and was really sort of embedded with the stage that capitalism sort of gave it in terms of like how, you know, different trade routes across the world were now open to Sudan because of the expansion of capitalism, and also because of Sudan's integration into the world via Ottoman expansion into Sudan. You know, at this time, like in the 19th century, slavery was at its highest rate in East Africa and across the trans-Saharan caravan routes. At the same time, wage labor didn't really exist in Sudan. And so for people who, you know, were beginning to own a lot of to own a lot of land, enslaved people became a really important way of consolidating power and wealth, and irrigated land that was across the Nile, which was really competitive. And so from that moment on, slavery and land, or the what's it called, the ownership of enslaved people and the ownership of land became sort of synonymous with capital gain and political power in Sudan, and has only increased throughout the 19th century and persisted even in the 20th century. And the British, although they came in with this sort of impetus to modernize Sudan and take it out of this, backwardsness and unproductivity. This is always how the colonizer presents themselves. In fact, they only sort of transformed the language that is used to describe, or that was used to describe how labor functioned in Sudan. So then a lot of these same people who were formerly enslaved and now made free were also used by the British to work on, cotton schemes or irrigation schemes that were development projects. And, they were basically working under similar conditions for little to no wages. Under the British. And so, the institution had changed by name, but not really by structure. So I think one of the modern implications of slavery really is, I think, how labor and race are matched onto each other. And it determines the kind of works that different groups of people, the type of work that different groups of people are able to do. And I think fundamentally, it also, like, the frontier where enslaved people were taken from, the southern and western peripheries of Sudan, South Sudan and Darfur, Kurdistan, these places now that are inundated with so much violence. This is a layered sort of history that's, is compounded by the fact that in the 19th century, people raided these areas to forcefully remove people and make money off of them. And this was an institution that sustained not just Sudan, but also like the Red Sea trade, the Indian Ocean trade, the Mediterranean, and, was a significant part of all of these different routes.
I saw videos.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence.
I saw videos of like the slave raids in South Sudan. I think this was during the time when we were still one country and there was war. And it's like I was like so shocked because nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about the slave raids. And it was just very shocking to see that in the 19th century. Like, this is recent. We were kids. We were alive at that time. So that's very, very, It's sad. It's sad to see like the modern day and how it still exists to this day. When did slavery officially end in Sudan?
That's a difficult question because, there were all these like charters to suppress the slave trade. Like in 1877 there was one, 1899 there was one, and these are sort of agreements between the Egyptian, the Ottoman, and the British governments to suppress the trade of slavery in Sudan. But really, this was just an attempt of all three governments to try to monopolize the trade and like actually continue making money off of it, but direct the money towards themselves. So, yeah, there were different laws that were passed under the colonial government, like in the 1920s, that tried to sort of regulate how formerly enslaved people were like became free, but they were never really successful. And I don't know actually if there's a law banning slavery in Sudan's modern constitution. There was a lot of people I think would be getting in trouble just because it's one that's continued. And so, yeah, I actually don't know. And I don't even know I'm not even really sure if it matters because, yeah, to this day, slavery exists. Like, and to this day, like the RSF that were funded by Europe in 2017 to prevent the movement of migrants from Libya to Europe, took these migrants to detention centers in Libya and profited off the slave trade there. So in many ways, the slave trade in Sudan has only evolved and taken on other forms. Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it still exists. So in other words, it still exists. There is no official time that it ended. Well, maybe there is an official time, but there's just a continuation. It just evolves. It looks different, but it's still, it is what it is. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really do appreciate you sharing some of your expertise. I know this is such a layered conversation. We could have this for hours and hours, but thank you so much for trying your best to condense it for our audience. Is there anything else you would want to leave our audience with or us with?
A final takeaway or anything?
I think just, for people who don't really know much about Sudan, I would say, I think just in your thinking about it, don't silo it into this place of like where other things and other places don't exist. But like, if you think about Sudan as a very integral part of the rest of the world, I think a lot will be revealed, not just about Sudan, but about the world itself. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you so much for your time and all your contributions.
Definitely
learned a lot from you, and just appreciate you.
Inshallah, Bayan will be graduating with her PhD next year from Yale, and we're so excited.
So proud of you also.
Right.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
that's
amazing.
Thank
you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Have a good night. I didn't know you were in Nairobi, by the way. I'm so sorry.
I'm not Nairobi. I'm in Mombasa.
Oh, you're in Mombasa. You're in Kenya.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Also in Kenya.
Have a good night. Bye.
All right.
All right. And then we have Anwar Ali, and he's a student at the University of Michigan. But I want to give you an opportunity to go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, thank you so much, and warm greeting to you and your audience. Yeah, so I study anthropology, mainly interested in archaeology and decolonizing archaeological practices, just giving communities a chance to narrate their own history. I've been working around like ancient Nubia and ancient Egypt.
Since you're a student of archaeology, we would love to hear some of your own like personal experiences of what you found during your excavations and how you feel that Sudan has contributed, or and East Africa has contributed to modern day civilization.
And also, what motivated you to even study that? Like,
Yeah.
what got you interested in that as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would start with how did I get into this, and then I can talk a little bit about the contributions. So I always, since the middle school, had interest in like, history, because there are stories that I've been told about our history, somewhat from our perspective to a degree. It was mostly about like the British Empire and how they conquered Sudan and how we resisted and all of that. This is like a recent history, but so it doesn't get like that much attention. And it also the narrative differ whenever you move from country to another. Anyway, so I had that interest, and then right around I think 2009, at the beginning of internet, I was like really curious because I live in a royal cemetery village. It's in the north of Sudan. It's a ancient Nubian archaeological site. It's called Kuru. On my way to the school, I would pass between the pyramids and like the tombs and so on. And there isn't that much information about them. No one would teach us this and that. And even in the school, when the day we had a lesson about this, it was like very brief, not that much information. There are so many reasons for this because the Arabo-Islamo culture is kind of dominant in the idea that, oh, these are like non-believers, ancient people, whatever. There is less care about that, I would say. I was really disappointed at that point, but then jump like fast forward to 2013. That was where like the second time that the Royal Cemetery started to be excavated by a Michigan University team. Yeah, at that time I just finished my high school and then going to undergrad. And then I started working with them in my vacations. And so I started learning more and more and asking them, and they started telling me, I really got so much passion from that because there was one area that we just used to play in as kids, and suddenly they excavated, and it turns out to be a temple with 26 columns and like rooms inside and tunnels. So it was fascinating to me. That's how I got started in knowing more and more about our ancient past. I think there are a lot of contributions, and they're usually overlooked just because of the way how our history is being taught and studied. The beginning of ancient history studies was through the eyes and the lens of Egyptologists, which are, people who are specialized and fascinated to a greater degree by the history of ancient Egypt, and they interpreted our culture of Nubia as just like an extension of Egypt, not as a sovereign nation that has its own trade with the surrounding neighbors, not as a nation that was actually had like a very strong army and very strong trade and craft and like even science and astronomy and like so many things and establishment. You can see that very obvious in across all Sudan, from the south of Egypt all the way to the south of Sudan. There are like evidence here and there and buildings and monuments and so on. So all of that is just overlooked. The interpretation is that while the Egyptian did that, we were just there. Like there are some Egyptologists in the past, early Egyptologists, they had this sense that, oh, we could not actually have made all of this. It must be the Egyptian or someone else from somewhere else came and did all of this, and we are just there. So they don't even acknowledge that we are capable of doing that, even though the evidence shows that clearly that we are, and we did that. It's even painted. But it's just
And
coming from.
when you say that, what would you say like the contributions that they give to Egypt? That's actually Sudanese.
I mean, so the problem is things get blurry once you go to that distant past to what thing exactly was here and got there. Our relation with ancient Egypt was, let's say, we were like equal. We were trading somewhat. We invade each other. Sometimes we share culture, because the problem is that there are some gods and goddesses and stuff like that you can distinct that this belong to, for example, Nubian, and this belong Egyptian. But there is a mixture because we lived so much together. Then, like, the culture itself kind of got mixed or very close. There was no also a distinction between, like, the idea of race is a modern idea, but there is definitely time where someone would conquer the other, take some people, enslave them, and so on. But like, it wasn't similar to our perception to it now. There are science that we had like very well-known skills of like using the bow, the arch. We were very good at it. We had very strong horsemen. They were well known and famous, and not only to Egypt, but to Persia and to the even like ancient Mesopotamia, because we were so good at training horses. Sometimes they would even like import trainers from us. There is also once you get to Meroe, there was like astronomy and like observer also known that it's a Nubian contribution.
And what are
else?
some of the things that you have excavated that were more like that you found fascinating? I'm sure everything that you found was fascinating, but
give us share one.
Yeah, share memorable. A few things and like the time frame that they came from. That would be, I think our viewers would find that very interesting.
Something interesting you discovered.
So I'll be humble here. I don't think I've discovered anything yet, but there are a lot of interesting things so we are working on the Nabatean period, which is 800 BCE to the Meroitic, which is 300 something, 320 and going on. Where we work, so I worked in two sites. First is in Al Kuru, which is where I grew up, and the second is in Barkal, which is Jebel Barkal, very well-known holy mountain. So in Kuru, we just re-excavated the Royal Cemetery, which was excavated first by George Andrew Reisner in 1918, 1919. We found some objects here and there and a lot of boats, and also we found that there is an extension for this cemetery. It goes down close to the Nile, and there has been some like wall which is suggested to be the city wall. So it's not just a cemetery, it's also a city. The city wall appeared to be like way modern, like even after Meroe, it's kind of Christian Nubia city wall. So there is like three different time period in that area, as in Jebel Barkal also. In Jebel Barkal, what is fascinating, and I think what we will learn more about is there is actually a settlement. This where the like normal individual in Nabata would have lived and served the Amun temple, because there is a huge Amun temple there. There are also like pyramids and tombs, but there has been a lot of focus on royal monuments. So right now, what we are working with Professor Jeff Emberling is we are trying to understand this settlement, and we're trying to get like more information about what type of food they've been eating and like what type of animal they raise. We're also trying to understand the dynamic of like just like normal day living. And this has never been, I don't think there has been a settlement excavated. The focus is always on the big monument, catchy kind of things that can bring you a lot of money, and fame.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think working on this settlement will get us a lot of information about what was happening there.
And then let us know what you are working on. What's going on? How's your degree going?
Where are you based right now? Because I was going to ask that earlier. Are you still in Sudan?
No, I left Sudan during the war. Also, actually, it was a long journey, but it happened. I made it. I'm right now I'm in Michigan.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And how has that transition been? I mean, leaving in the midst of a war and
Oh,
then,
wow.
yeah, please touch on that a little bit. I'm sure that was a lot.
I mean, yeah, it's not pleasant. Like it's, I guess the very first day of the war, which was April 15, I think, was in the morning, 9 a.m., having my coffee, where like, I've heard the explosion in Mary Airport, because there was like the one of the early confrontation between the RSF and the South, the National Army was in the airport base in Mary, which was, it was shocking because like I think for a lot of us, I mean, I've definitely heard a lot of explosion in my life and like the sound of the fightings, but it was very new to everyone there and very shocking. Also, the idea that there are people we know that actually they are working in this space, and they're just like young men. What's gonna happen? And like everyone was so confused. And what if they came here? And it was just the shock of that. And then after that, of course, like. When the war went on into its first and second month, like I have an extended family in Khartoum, in Medini, and like Jazeera, and a lot of those places. Um, they all had to flee their life and leave everything behind, and so they all migrated to the north, and so the area that we live in became super like dense of people, and it's just like there is not that much available housing or even resources. But we as Sudanese, we have this sense of generosity, and we refuse to like make like refugees camp. But there was a lot of places that were repurposed for this, like schools and mosque, and um yeah, a lot of places people just kind of try to cover that and collaborate together.
Yeah,
And I think so far,
wasn't it a lot
yeah.
of people that came together that, just helped one another? I know you talked about how you were a part of like the food. I forgot what it was
Oh yeah,
called. Yeah. Can you expound on
yeah,
that and how the people
um,
came together?
yeah, definitely. We have places that are dedicated for like Islamic teaching, or like we call them khalwa or khalawi. It's an empty place with like with all the things that the basic thing that a person might need, like toilet and stuff like that, and areas to rest and sleep. Yeah, so we came together and we prepared like meals for the incoming people, and it was really a great thing to see happening. This is not to say like a lot of good things happen during war. Only there are, of course, like negative phenomena that you see, especially in big cities. People trying to exploit others, raising the prices
The
of
food.
rent and all that. But like, there are really some great side that I've seen. So much solidarity in coming together and providing food and like housing. It happened with me. I had to go all the way like to the north to Halfa to just. I was trying to cross the border to Egypt. I had a valid visa, but I had there was some problem entering Egypt. I actually stayed with some people there. I was lucky to have my brother there, so I stayed with him. But like with my brother, there was almost three families staying in the same place. And in my hometown, also Al Kuru, we hosted, I think, more than seven families of my extended family, and then a lot
Oh
of
my
other
goodness.
houses are also filled. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. Wow. I mean, it shows like the power of us coming together and staying unified because if the government's not going to do its job in protecting, it's going to be us everyday people that will,
Yeah,
fill
for
in this,
sure.
fill in the blanks and step in and do what we can. So, but we thank you so much for joining this conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've done a podcast before, so I know it's a lot to ask someone to come and speak publicly. So we really do appreciate you being a part of this. Is there anything else you want to leave us with before we let you go?
I mean, I would say I think we need to know our history, and we need to reshape it in our own perception, in our own lens. We need to see what is not told. When you go to school, you learn about the Romans and how they conquered the world, but you never learn about Amani-Rinas that resisted their army in Nubia, in Sudan, and actually pushed them back. We had women who are, powerful at that time, and we have a lot of rich history. I think we all need to go back, look at it from our lens. That by itself will empower us to move forward. And as you mentioned, it's not always about the government. Governments can come and go, do terrible things, but we are the people. We're staying in that land, and I think it's our responsibility to unite and push away all the imperialists and survive as we have.
Absolutely.
That's so true. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
I'm on Facebook, but I will share a blog that we boast our work that we do as a Michigan team in Jebel Burkle. So we boast updates every once in a while. Of course, now because of the war, we're not doing that much work in ground, but we have part of our colleagues in Sudan. They're doing some work. So I would just say follow our blog and subscribe in the feed, and hopefully we see great things.
Yes, and hopefully we can have you again on a future conversation. Thank you so much for your time. You did amazing. Like Sarah said, I don't know if you've done a podcast before, but you did a very good job. So,
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting me.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have a great day. And
you too.
Yes. So thank you guys so much for viewing this episode, watching this episode of Ladies of SOSA. We really appreciate you. Like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah, and we will catch you. But first of all, we need to keep this going because we didn't even scratch the surface. There's so much to uncover, so many layers. But we're going to keep trying.
Yes. And and I need to keep learning the history of Sudan as well. That's something that I'm trying to learn. And I've learned so much on this podcast already. Mm-hmm. So it's a blessing to be able to communicate with one another and share perspectives. And let's just keep learning about our history of Sudan and also now South Sudan, since we're two different countries. Yeah. But we're still so interconnected. We have to learn about Sudan even before we can get into the creation of South Sudan.
So if any of our viewers want to be featured on an episode, please feel free to use the link to our link tree. There is a link on there to where you can fill out an intake form or access to our email so that you can reach out to us. We're always looking for guests and panelists. So
follow us on Discord. Follow our Discord, our community on there. We share perspectives, topics. We ask for topic suggestions and history. There's a history forum on there. Mm-hmm. So if you want to share some South Sudanese or African history, you're free to do that. So make sure you join our community. And again, thank you so much, Anwar. And we are going to see you guys next time.
Yes.
Thank you.